What's up, the internet? We're back here on day 2. This is part... Jen, I lost count.
Part 4.
4? Part 4 of our Pride weekend. Jenna just put a big piece of food in her mouth, and I was going to bring Andy on, but I saw that he did the same, so I'm just going to make everybody uncomfortable.
I swallowed really quickly.
Cracker.
I can't tell you how many of these things where I've had to do where I've got like a sub sandwich over here, and I'm like, here, I'm going to make the other person full screen. Take a bite, make them not full screen.
That's what I thought. That's what I thought was happening. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. So, welcome back in, guys. This is the final part of our kickoff weekend of our Pride Month celebration here on The Experience. And we have a guest waiting backstage who is an absolute legend. And I am going to let him and Andy just kind of take the reins and talk about whatever they want. I wanted to thank Jenna on screen for her time this weekend and helping us out. Jenna is great. And thank Krista for hosting the last
doing host for this kind of stuff. The last time I played host was at least 10, 15 years ago, and it was for college. So this was definitely nice. This is so much more fun. I didn't get yelled at by drunk college guys this time.
And I want to thank Krista for hosting the last panel. So without further ado, I am going to bring in the legendary Jose Villarrubia. I'm going to get Jenna and I out of here and let Andy and Jose have a good time. We will see everybody in just a little bit.
I think we're live. Hey, Jose.
Hello, Andy. How are you?
I'm well. How about you?
Great.
Your beard looks good.
Thank you.
Yeah, and you got a haircut recently, post-COVID.
I have about 2 months ago.
Fantastic. Jose, we've known each other for a long time. Long time. But for the audience here, I want to establish really quickly, how do you pronounce your last name?
Well, there are 2 ways to pronounce it, in Spanish and in English, because I don't expect English speakers to pronounce it in Spanish because it has sounds that don't exist in English. So if you don't speak Spanish, it's Villarrubia, like it's written. And if you speak Spanish, it's Villarrubia.
Villarrubia.
Villarrubia. It has a B sound for the V, and the R is roll.
All right, there we go. So what most people know you as is as a comic colorist. Mm-hmm. What you're here for this weekend is the fact that you are also and have been out in the comic industry as a proud queer man for 30 years or so.
Yep.
I don't remember what was your first work in the industry?
Hellshock.
Was Hellshock with Jay Lee?
Well, I had 2 pinups in Who's Who in the Legion of Superheroes that I penciled, and one was published. And then after that, a few years later, it was Hellshock with Image. Yeah.
I didn't even know that you were in Who's Who. That's
yes,
why was the other one not published?
Well, I was friends with. Well, I was teaching a painting class, and one of my students turned out to be Greg LaRocque, who at the time was working on Legion. And so it was thrilling to meet him, and we became friends. And then he asked me if I wanted to do some art for the Who's Who in the Legion. I said yes. So he asked me to pick the characters. He told me towards the end of the alphabet because most were done already. So I picked White Witch, which I thought looked very homely and I could sort of beautify somewhat, give her a little glamour. And Timberwolf, who I thought was cute. So I did both of them, and Timberwolf turned out was already drawn by somebody else, but White Witch wasn't. So it was inked, I think, by Bob Wyzek, and it was published. And that's my first piece of work, and that was in the early 90s.
It's ironic that you had to go for the end of the alphabet because you should have done Color Kid.
That would be nice, huh?
And actually, I was wearing when they interviewed me yesterday. I was wearing a Timberwolf T-shirt that nobody caught on because it's so many designs ago. So beyond being a comic book colorist, you're also a fine artist, and you teach both art and photography. Where do
Actually,
you currently teach?
I don't teach photography. I did photography for many years. For 10 years, I concentrated on fine art photography. And but I never taught photography. I've only taught fine art and illustration, which includes comics. I have been teaching since I was 25. That's a long time ago. Um, and after teaching for many years at Towson University, I was hired full time in my other alma mater, which is the Maryland Institute College of Art. And I have been a full time faculty member there for the last 21 years.
And how did you transition as a fine artist to comics itself?
Well, I wanted to do comics to begin with. I just recently found all these comics that I drew when I was 12 and 13 years old, and also the drawings that I sent to Marvel and DC when I was 18, hoping to get a job, um, which didn't happen. So I always wanted to be a comics artist. And then when Marvel and DC rejected me at 18, they just sent me a form letter. Really, I just thought, okay, I'll do something else. So I finished my degree in fine art. I did an MFA in painting. I started teaching college courses. I got bored with painting, and I started doing fine art photography. So I never really stopped liking comics and reading comics, and I did stop drawing them after 18, but I followed the field very closely. And so I didn't have to transition back from comics because I never left. I mean, the reason I met Jay Lee was because I was in the board of directors of a local art center, and they asked me to curate a show of local comic artists. So for a fine art exhibition, so I invited Bernie Wrightson, who's from Baltimore, Mark Whitley and Mark Hamill, of course, Greg LaRocque, Ron Wilson. And at the comic book store, somebody told me you should contact this kid, Jay Lee, who's in Virginia. And he's doing really hard work at Marvel at the time. I contacted him and we became really good friends. And then when he got his first big break at Image, he didn't want to have digital coloring in his work. He knew I was a fine art painter. He had never seen my attempts as a teenager, nor should he have looked at, but he knew that I could paint. And so he said, would you want to color my comic? And I said, yeah, piece of cake. So I talked to him about what to do. We had very similar ideas, and that was the beginning.
Now, when you broke in as a colorist, it wasn't the beginning of digital coloring, which really started with Malibu Comics just prior to Image, but it was very early on in the whole digital coloring process. So what was it, very trial and error for you? I assume you were working mostly with Photoshop at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it was the beginning. I mean, Photoshop was not what it is, of course, not even close to what it is today. It had a lot of limitation. Computers couldn't handle big files. Scanners were very expensive. It was very complicated, just even from a logistics standpoint. I remember doing my first job at my school. I took a Photoshop class, and then I had access to the lab. And I had to use computers there because I couldn't really afford to have one set up at home. So the it was the beginning of, I mean, the beginning of, as you said correctly, Malibu was the studio that really started. Steve Olive doing Akira was like the first great digital colorist. But at the beginning they were using PCs. They weren't using Macs. And they were not using Photoshop either. They would use other paint programs that actually would give them mapping effects. Whenever they would do a gradient, it wouldn't be smooth. It would have like lines in between.
Mhm.
And right away, they went for a very glossy sort of imitation video game look. Jay didn't want that. Jay vehemently didn't want that. He wanted something hand painted. So I, I told him I could just paint the pages and then scan them and tweak them in Photoshop. And the person who was working him at first told him that was impossible. So the first few issues I did like color guides, but I learned Photoshop so I could work with Jay, and then I just would do color. I would do painted pages. I would scan them. I would overlap his line art, adjust the edges, and that was it.
So you were actually doing kind of a combination of what old style comic colorists did, which was that they would paint the Pantone colors onto art, which then the printer would take and translate into what we saw as colored comic pages. You were doing a form of that by painting the artwork before the black line art was put in, correct?
Yes, it was more similar to what I had grown up with in Europe, with what they call blue line, which is the ink pages are printed in blue, and then they're colored in watercolor, and then sometimes they put the line art in acetate over it, and then they shoot the whole thing. That's how Mark Wheatley had been a pioneer of doing that with a comic called Breathtaker that Mark Hempel drew. And that was one of the early comics. And then in America, done that way. In Epic, they were doing several series like that. But the difference was that I thought of doing it in the computer, meaning I didn't really invent the technique. I just refined it in terms of like incorporating Photoshop into the process to adjust what was painted by hand. Eventually, I did more and more on the computer, and even at some point, it just became all computer coloring with painted textures that I would create myself.
Now, when you were creating that work early on with Jay, and really it was such a different look for an Image comic back then. I mean, it was very clearly a painted book, but it still had the black line art, so it was a comic book that was painted. Was there a direct line that you could see, or did people come to you and say, how are you doing this? Did you end up teaching this to the rest of the comics community, or did everyone kind of have to discover it on their own?
Oh, I know. I was very open with my methods. I had met along the years other professionals that I have asked how they were doing something, and they were very protective of their techniques, and that always surprised me. I was completely transparent on how I did everything, and as a matter of fact, in the first job that I did for by myself, which was in the first, and there was the second Hell Shock series, which we didn't have a technician copying my colors digitally. I just did it all myself. I wrote an article called "How to Color Comics the Villarrubia Way" in the first issue, so everybody would know exactly what I was doing. So I never had any secrets, and nobody came to me because they could just read it. If they wanted to find out, all they had to do is buy something I'd done, and all the information was there. Mm-hmm. So, because I was a teacher before I became a professional artist, for me, that the teaching part is something that goes without saying. I enjoy very much sharing the information, and I'm not protective. I don't have any secrets.
It was not. There was no part of you that was proprietary about it.
Absolutely not.
You were like, if we share this, everyone benefits.
Absolutely. And I thought, I think that experimenting is a part of art that is fundamental for its development. And I think that the more tools you have in your toolbox, the better art you're going to produce. So I thought anyone who wants to try working this way and find out if they like it or not, they can do it this way. And I was very lucky because Jay put me in touch with some colorists that really helped me in the beginning. You had to do a lot of the prep work for press by yourself. Photoshop didn't do it, so you had to work with ink limits and trapping and all sorts of ridiculous technical stuff that I just didn't know what to do. And the printing was very random. You never knew what was going to come out once it was
Right.
printed. But he put me in contact with several professionals who really, really helped me and told me, do this, don't do that, And so, I was the beneficiary of their generosity right away. And, just I always had really great relationship with comic book colorists in particular.
Mhm.
Like I have a lot of colorist friends. I have gotten jobs from them that they passed to me. I passed jobs to some of them if I wasn't, if I couldn't do it. So it's like, I was just thinking about Bernie Wrightson, and when I got to work with Bernie, he was one of my heroes, and it was a series that wasn't assigned to me originally, but the colorist who was too busy to do it suggested that I would do it, and so that was really, really great.
Which project was that?
This is something we did called City of Others. It's a horror comic that came out from Dark Horse.
I was going to say that was Dark Horse, right?
Yes.
Yeah. It's funny. I speaking of Bernie Wrights, and whenever I trim my eyebrow hairs, I think of Bernie because
Yes.
for those who
antenna.
don't know, Bernie had the bushiest eyebrow hairs I've ever seen on a human.
For sure.
They were almost creatures living on the side of his face. It was quite interesting to when you were talking to him, because you would be transfixed by these little fairies that were dancing around.
Yeah, he was. I adore him. I adore his art. I adore him personally. I had the privilege to meet him for that exhibition where I met Jay that I told you about, and he was charming and just a real gentleman. And so when the opportunity came to work with Steve Niles and him in City of Others, and Shana Gore was our editor, who's a wonderful editor, I jumped at the chance. And he was happy with what I did, which was great. I actually colored the covers for the last work that he did, Frankenstein Alive. I colored the covers for that very discreetly because the work was completed in black and white and gray, so it wasn't really necessary.
Now, I believe you transitioned from Image to your next major work was with Vertigo, correct?
More or less. Several things happened at the same time. With Image, I was working with Jay with Image. Then he went to Marvel. Then we used to talk every day. So he was like, which character should I revive for Marvel Knights? And he's like, I know Marvel continuity really, really freaking well because I was older and nerdier than him. So I suggested that he do the Inhumans. And so he did Inhumans with Paul Jenkins, and that was a big success, and he won the Eisner. But Marvel would not allow me to color it because my work was deemed, quote, too artistic. So somebody else colored it, and I get a lot of compliments for Inhumans. And I used to say something, but I just don't anymore because it doesn't really matter. So I sign a lot of Inhumans because I just don't want to embarrass whoever is bringing them to me,
Right.
So it doesn't really matter to me. But no, it wasn't like editors were willing to hire me at first because of that too artistic comment. On the other hand, people like Warren Ellis was really paying attention to my work and wrote some really complimentary things about me when I was completely unknown. So industry people, Brian K. Vaughan asked for me for a series, and industry people started noticing that I did something different. But editors tend to be conservative, and they wanted to do more like the same thing that they were publishing. When Jay got enough momentum, he was able to just say, "It's Jose, or I'm not doing it." So I was kind of shoehorned into the job. But then when I met the editors and I started working with them, then they gave me tons of work. And, I befriended them, and they're friends to this day. So at the same time, I was friends with a local photographer, fine art photographer, Stephen John Phillips, and he had been doing covers for Vertigo. And he wanted to do a full graphic novel. And that's what you're talking about, doing stuff. I don't know if it was, I think it was concurrent with my Marvel work. I think it was all happening at the same time. Um, he wanted to do a graphic novel with Pat McCreel, who recently passed away, unfortunately. And he was the writer of Chiaroscuro, a series about
Right.
Leonardo da Vinci, a very gay, positive, daring series from Vertigo.
It was,
one
yes.
of the many. And so he asked me to work with him, and we ended up collaborating in this graphic novel called Veils, where I did all this photo montage work with Steven. And it was a lot of fun. It was a ton of work. He had no budget, but it was fun. It was well received. He got good reviews, but it didn't lead to any other jobs like that. But it did lead me to work with Alan Moore on Promethea, who saw what I'd done in Veils, and he thought of an idea to put in the series a photo sequence where the characters become quote unquote real, and it happened to be the one that had to do with the gay storyline in Promethea and the sort of fantasy transgender character that with a tragic ending. So he wrote this thing especially for me, and that was enormously flattering. And it felt very important at the time because the content was pretty transgressive, but it was being done, with the utmost care by Alan.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about the kind of when you came out in the industry, because as I recall, when the first time I had you on the Gays and Comics panel, you were still pretty early on in your career, but I don't ever recall you being really questioning about, like, can I do this, can I not do this, and so forth. You were just kind of like, yes, I'd be happy to, I'm out. Did that ever become, as you were moving forward with your nascent career, did that ever become a question mark for you of, because people think, well, writers and artists always have to think about that, but they don't necessarily think, well, what do letterers or colorists or other production, what people think of as production, do they have to be concerned about it? So what was the situation like for you?
Well, this was a situation. When I came here in 1980, it was illegal to be gay in the United States. It was illegal to even visit the United States. I had to fill up a form saying that I was not a communist or a sexual deviant in order to be admitted into the country. And sexual deviancy meant gay. So I was very aware of the fragility of my situation here from the moment I set foot in this country. We had sodomy laws in Maryland until the end of the 80s. There was the Defense of Marriage law that Clinton signed, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I don't have to tell you, you're an activist and you know this inside and out a million times better than me. But what I think that I was talking to another friend of mine who had a similar trajectory to mine. And I think that people don't really realize, because nobody's talked about it, and certainly I haven't, of the plight of gay and lesbian and transgender immigrants, how homophobic the laws, the US government, the politicians have been and still are. And so we lived in fear. I mean, we were out, I had a boyfriend, everybody knew I was gay, and never, ever, ever pretended otherwise, but we were in fear literally for our lives, because we could be deported by, being reported to immigration or whatever. So it took a little bit of guts to be out. However, in the comics industry, I never felt that anyone, what I did was so secondary that didn't really even matter to people very much. Since it was a side job, because I was already teaching in college, um, if I had found that, you know, it didn't work out being gay in comics, I would have not worked in comics anymore
Hmm.
because I had the luxury of having another career. So, in that way, on the one hand, I was in a vulnerable position, but on the other hand, I was in a strong position because I had
You had something to fall back on if you needed to.
that I never abandoned.
Right.
So, that put me in a much less precarious situation than the majority of my peers. It had to do with the fact that I had an MFA. I went to school much more than you would need to color comics, that's for sure. You know, all that magna cum laude stuff. So, but that gave me some sense of semi security.
Right.
So, I think what would happen, like when I first met Jay, he was very young and I was a little older than him. And I probably was the first gay person he ever met. So, he was like, it was new for him. It was new for him, but we had perfect rapport right away. And then, in the industry itself, I was, I never felt, I would feel like some of the people I would meet, and sometimes in positions of power, they were not used to being around gay people.
Hmm.
But I thought that was the problem. I mean, honestly, I was like, that's really their problem. Like, they have ways to go. But,
Right.
I don't need them. So, and people were careful around me, of course.
That
Um,
it's an interesting thing to talk about. That it's kind of the flip side of white privilege, where because you had work privilege, because you had another job and you didn't need it, it wasn't as maybe um, concerning to you if you ran into some of that homophobia that did exist when you came out in the industry, and when I came out in the industry and so forth, that the homophobia and some of it still exists, but because you had something else that you could do, you could say take it or leave it. Um,
I think
and
that has to
you have
do.
people like Jay or like Alan Moore who were like, I want Jose.
Yeah,
And that's that.
that's pretty much how it happened. I
And
mean,
that's
Alan
kind
said
of
like,
that's kind of like the equivalent of white privilege, but not.
well, I have to thank my parents because, I mean, not that it took them a while to deal with me being gay and all that stuff, but they raised me to be very confident and be very to have a lot of integrity. That's how I was raised. So when I faced hardship, I was like, it was very clear to me it was not my problem. And so even if I was impotent to do anything about it, even if I had no recourse, I just knew that I was in the right, and that hopefully things would eventually become slightly better, and it did get slightly better. So, but I was very much aware of the fact that things had to change, and that it was a very slow process. Still is. We're still in the midst of the process. And and in the '80s, I had my dearest friend was in ACT UP, and he was a big activist, and I did artwork with him, and I did a lot of provocative stuff in fine art that had to do with gay activism and gay visibility. And I was very involved in the community, but for example, I couldn't go to ACT UP demonstrations because I couldn't afford to get arrested because I would have been deported. So I think that those things sort of escape American citizens because they just don't know how vulnerable immigrants are.
Right, right. At what point did you become an American citizen, or do you have dual citizenship?
I had dual citizenship many, many years later. I didn't become an American citizen until I found out that I could keep my Spanish citizenship, so I could have both.
Mhm.
At first, I would have had to give up my Spanish citizenship, and I was not about to do that. So I have both citizenships now.
Do you find in the industry then, did you find it more difficult being an openly gay man or somebody who was looked at as a person of color outsider because of your accent? Or because many people, what people don't realize from the comics industry of yore 30 years ago, we didn't know what each other looked like.
No.
We knew what each other sounded like on the phone, and that was it. So you didn't know if you were talking to a creator of color necessarily, a black creator, a Hispanic creator, or an Asian creator, or something like that. You didn't know that, but you could tell if somebody had an accent, and if somebody was openly queer, you could, that news traveled really fast.
Mhm.
So did you find one to be more of an impediment or less of an impediment, or did you have any impediment?
No, not at all. The only comments I ever got about my accent is, which is very funny, but I would hear and still hear it many times. I love your accent,
Right?
and I wish I could have one. Which is like, okay. I did have problems when I used to teach at the state university I taught before. There would be students that would complain to me about how they could not understand a word that came out of my mouth, and they would say it with completely straight face to me. So that was a bit of a problem, but never in the school where I teach now, which is much more international, and never anything serious. It was just people being dumb. So no, I never really found any of that in the industry at all. I think because I'm Caucasian, I think a lot of people, and people don't really know what. I mean, unless they're tourists and go to Spain, they really don't know a whole lot about Spain. Many people don't. So, um, and because I was fluent in English, I mean, when I came, I already was completely fluent.
Mhm.
So I no, I never felt uh, that. So now, if when I turn my back, somebody said a cuss word about me, they would have said it anyway. Uh, and when people want to cuss you out, they don't really have to have many reasons. So, but at least to my face, no. And I never think that that had any impact. I thought I could be a Martian and have 5 arms, and I would have gotten the same jobs I got because basically the fact that I was easy to work with, that I was fast, that I didn't complain, that I delivered what I said I would deliver were the things that kept editors and artists asking for me. Coloring is a very service oriented role in comics. You're not really paid to be creative.
Mhm.
You're really paid to complement the art and to make everybody hopefully uh, shine if you can. And so, coming from fine art, the difference was very very clear to me, and I was very comfortable with it because I love being like a person behind the scenes that makes somebody look better.
Mhm.
And I always compare it with like cinematography in film or even makeup or wigs or the wardrobe. It's like we're there to serve the writer and the artist and make them look good. And I really enjoyed that freedom because when I was in fine art, I had to be making statements about my point of view, my ideas, my vision, my everything. And I did that for so many years, and I was okay doing it. I mean, I had things to say, but at some point, I was like, how about if I don't have so much to say and I just devote myself to doing something that is fun and that is not as involved and that actually people can enjoy.
See,
So,
it's interesting that you have that perspective, and it's a very humble perspective. And I've always known you to be an incredibly both well-spoken but humble person as well. Um, but 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 I look at you and I say that perspective is not what I would view you as, because I look at you as one of the best known colorists in the business, in terms of uh, creating more art out of other people's art, that you actively do enhance their work to the point where even when you're working with people like J.H. Williams or Ryan Sook or Paul Pope, you're enhancing their work to a completely other level. They're great artists to begin with, and with your coloring, it goes to a different level. And it's surprising that you're so humble about that and saying, I'm just in service to the art, when what you're doing is you're actually enhancing everything that they're producing.
I mean, both. I hear what you're saying, and thank you. And I do take it very seriously. And I do think that when I work best, I do enhance the art, and I make it attractive and compelling. And also, I can add a lot to the narrative component, that's for sure. But, it's still secondary. It's still secondary. And I'm not saying that to be falsely humble. It's just how I really feel.
Mhm.
I really believe that if it wasn't me, it could be somebody else who could be contributing in any given project, and it would look. If it was somebody good, it would look great, and I would be admiring it just as much as if I had done it myself. So I feel that there is. It is difficult to do well, and it requires a lot of knowledge of aesthetics to do it well, and competence in a lot of areas. But at the same time, I feel that it's a minor echelon when it comes to like the levels of the creativity that goes into a story. And so, but I mean, I do take great pride in my work, and I do, I post all those side by sides of what the work looks when I receive it and when it looks like when I'm done. I've done a lot of those for Facebook. I have an album of those. Because until I started making those, people didn't really understand what I did. And even artists that I work with didn't understand exactly what I was doing, or editors. And I got feedback from fans, of course, because characters. But I actually got feedback from professionals that I had worked with, and they just didn't quite get it until they saw the before and after.
Right.
So that was gratifying. Um, but I was interviewed in Spain the year before last, before the pandemic, and it was for a widely seen uh, magazine. And the interviewer was asking me about how I felt about the fact that people don't know that there's such a thing as comic book colorists and what we should change about that. And I told him, honestly, I was perfectly fine with the fact that people don't know that there's comic colorists. Because if somebody's interested in how a comic is put together, God knows they can go online and find out every single detail about it, and who's who, and who has gotten the Eisner and the Harvey for best coloring, and blah, 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 and lots of reviews. If you're not interested, that's fine. Like, it doesn't bug me one bit. And the interviewer was shocked because he thought I would be like rah colorist, but I'm not rah anything.
Well, it's interesting to me though that and this may tell me whether this is an effect of the editor or the writer or the artist, but your name is one of the few names that I've seen on covers or on book spines in terms of the coloring, that I've actually seen where they have said, here's the writer, here's the artist, here's the colorist. And that's, I mean, I have to fight sometimes as the writer to get my name on a cover. So I would assume that that's something that that's a tremendous sign of respect, I would think, for your work.
Yes, I in the beginning I had to fight for that a little bit because they wouldn't do. I mean, at the beginning at DC they would erase my signature whenever I color something, But I had to, like when I did the first job with Corbin Cage, I remember like they were like putting my name in the comics covers, but not in the trade and things like that, or not in the poster that I colored. That was huge. So there was a little bit of resistance, but um, very politely. But I've always told editors I want my name in the cover, and they say, "Well, we don't do it." It's like, okay, well, you should think about doing it. So I have asked for it many times. I was with in Angoulême in the French Comics Festival with a very famous colorist. We did a panel together in French, which was really something. My French is not that good, and she was complaining about how colorists are not respected in France, and how their names are not in the cover, and blah blah blah. They're hidden in the credits and all that stuff. And she was like, we are artists and we deserve credit, and this and that, and da 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 da, which I thought was fine. So then they asked me, what do I feel about that? And I said, well, uh, I asked for my name to be in the credits. I asked for my name to be in the cover. And sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. And if it is, good. And if it isn't, there's something else that I'm working on right now that maybe that would be in. So it's not like, um, it's nice. It's nice to see my name in print. It's nice to see it in the spines of the books. It's nice when they put it in the cover. But if they don't put it, I don't lose any sleep over it.
Before we get to your aesthetic, which I do want to talk about, there is one artist who you've worked with who most people would tend to think, why does he need a colorist? And so I want to hear from you how your relationship with Bill Sienkiewicz came about, and how do you bring something to the work of Bill Sienkiewicz when he's a painter himself and he's such a unique and stylized artist?
Well, Bill was my hero probably since I was 14. And I would not just buy his work, I would study his work. And when he started doing painted work, I was just obsessed with every panel. I had the good fortune of meeting him and working with him early in my career, and and then befriending him. So we have done a few jobs together, but one of my first, right after Jay Lee, I worked with Bill Sienkiewicz. Now, the style that I was using with Jay Lee for both Hellshock and The Sentry was very inspired by Bill Sienkiewicz to begin with. So I know exactly what to do with Bill's work. Now, why did I work with him? It's because he wasn't going to do the whole job painted. He was just doing the line art, and and then somebody else was going to color it. And so he liked what I did, and then we did a few more things together. Um, Many times he would do jobs that they were budgeted in such a way that the company could not afford me, so I would only do the cover, and that was a shame. But with Sienkiewicz, it's just not even like an effort. It's like everything is there already in the line art, and since I was one of his students, um, not physically but spiritually, uh, it was easy to do. It was fun, always, and without any hesitation. I just knew what to do with it, especially because he was being colored digitally with like mapping and crap. And I was like, no, no, this is like a big wash of color, just like his ink marks and so on and so forth. So, yeah, with Bill, it's really good synergy. But it is not because him and I have synergy, it's because I studied him. So it's not like I had a style that really matched his style. No, it's because he's been a master to me, literally.
So let's talk about your style and aesthetic. It sounds funny to say that the colorist, a gay colorist has some of their aesthetic because they're queer, but I know in the past when we've talked and with many gay artists that they'll talk about the fact that their LGBTQness does affect their aesthetic and their art style. How has it affected yours?
Well, since I was a teenager, I like a lot of things in art that were stereotypically gay at the time, uh, in terms of taste. Um, I wasn't picking them because they were gay. I was picking them because I liked them. So, for example, the first painters I really cared for were the Preraphaelite painters and other Victorian artists and the symbolists. With almost no exceptions, there were only like a couple. All of those were straight artists obsessed with women. So, but they had a very decorative and sometimes androgynous way of drawing. They had a lot of there was a lot of what they call perversity in how they did it, and I didn't know why, but I just loved it. So I think that my taste has been shaped in part by what I would consider stereotypically late 20th century gay male taste. The whole camp thing, like Susan Sontag's Note on Camp and all that stuff. But because I come from a very art oriented family, um, and my mother really encouraged me to do art since I was very little, I had uh, a, a wealth of exposure to, I started taking academic private lessons when I was 12. So I was drawing from the plaster cast of Greek statues at 12 and copying old master paintings from postcards at 12. Um, and so uh, I was completely immersed in classic art of all sorts. That wasn't considered anything gay at the time at all in Spain. And I don't know, there's always been more of a suspicion about uh, culture as something more sissified or something, is not playing football in high school or whatever. But we didn't have jocks in my school. We didn't really have that whole bullying thing that you have here. I was popular because I could do art. I was the kid that I didn't get bullied. Like everybody liked me because I would do their drawings for them when they couldn't do their homework. I would just draw it for them. It would take me like 2 minutes to do it. It's like better than they could do in their lives. So, it was very different that way. Now, I think that I have liked a lot of gay artists over the years. It was certainly a huge influence when I did fine art photography and painting, because then I could control the imagery. I had the great honor of meeting Herb Ritz, who was like one of my heroes, and I bought an original print from him. I met Victor Skrbneski. Hung out with David LaChapelle in New York. I was in very high-end queer art circles in the early 90s. And certainly I was hyper aware of gay aesthetic and the emerging queer activist aesthetic at the time. But I had to put all that away for coloring superheroes and Hellshock and Sentry and all that stuff. None of that affected how I did my coloring work, because I was just, I always say that coloring is just finishing somebody else's drawing. They give you the drawing and it's not quite there, and you just finish it. But you don't decide what's in the drawing. You just add stuff to it, or. So all of that knowledge that I had of queer aesthetics and gay art, which to me was so important and still is, could not really be reflected in what colors I use in mainstream or alternative comics, because I just didn't have the space to do it, since I could not control the imagery.
Right.
So,
well, let's talk about when it did, because you definitely controlled the imagery in what most people think of as your most queer project. You talked about working on Promethea, and that was with Alan Moore and J.H. Williams. And then you did a book called Voice of the Fire, and you provided the photography for that with Alan. But in 1988, Alan had organized a book called ARG, Artists Against Rampant Government Homophobia, which was a benefit book that was against Clause 28, which was a very anti-gay British law that was just horrific. And in that book, he did a poem called The Mirror of Love, and I believe Steve Bissett was the original illustrator for that, and it was very short.
Yeah, Bissett, Rick Veitch and Steve Bissett, they did it together.
Okay. But then I'm going to let you tell the story about this because we've got about 10 minutes left. And I'm going to let you tell the story about this. I have it right here. Let me see.
Oh, thank you.
On camera. Whoop, there we go.
Thank you.
The Mirror of Love. And this was from Top Shelf.
Yes.
And I've got to say, this is my go-to wedding present.
Oh, wonderful.
I bought literally a case of these, and every time we go to a wedding, this is the book I give them. Whether it's a straight wedding or a gay wedding or whatever
Doesn't
else.
matter.
This is the gift because it is such an incredible work.
Thank you.
About love, about queer love, and the combination of your photography and Alan's words together are this is should have won a Pulitzer. This should have won every award. It should have won a Grammy.
Thank you.
Every award possible should have been won by this book. So can you tell us about The Mirror of Love? How did it come about? What has it meant to you?
Well, I'm going to do the short version because we don't have a lot of time. But basically, I had read the text without the comic in a magazine and as a poem, and I found it very moving. I remember I just cried. I was just so blown away by the text. And then I sort of put it away. A little later, I was given the opportunity, I sort of created the opportunity to do a play in a cycle of queer performances. It's called Queer Cafe. And I wanted to do something on the stage I'd never tried. My friend David Drake from the Nightly Requiem Kiss Me fame directed me. And we adapted, with Alan's blessing, we adapted Mirror of Love to the stage. Afterwards, I started work on illustrating Voice of the Fire, and a French fan asked me in Angoulême if I would do a comic of Mirror of Love. I said no, but I would do a book. And so he asked Chris Taros. Chris Taros said yes. Alan said yes. And I just went ahead and illustrated it. I saw it in my mind that it would be like a big picture book. And also that the text that he had written would be adapted to put it in poem form. I actually edited some of the stuff. Alan actually made some changes because my recommendation, so that was really good. And I had full support. Oh, yeah, I love that. Sappho. I went to Northampton with a portfolio of like maybe 8 pictures to show Alan to get his approval. And he's very affectionate and very wonderful person. And I had made a folder. Oh, yeah, the gay bashing one. I had made a folder and I put the pictures inside, like a sampling of photographs. And when Alan opened the package, he looked at the print, and then he just started saying what part of the poem it was. So that was wonderful. And so it was well received. It was not, it didn't sell as much as it should have because there was no context for it within the publisher and really within the industry. I think that the gay market, which existed at the time, were very skeptical of it. They didn't know Top Shelf. They didn't really know who Alan Moore was. So, it was well received internationally. It's been translated to Spanish and to French and to Italian twice. So there was talks of a Portuguese edition as well. And I've been changing the pictures as it gets reprinted to change the Pope. So it's like the current Pope whenever the edition comes out.
Wow. So there's alternate editions, not just
everyone
the
is different.
language, but the photography.
Oh yeah, and I added the different frontispiece, and yeah, I'd like to give something. I want to give them something
Right.
when they make a new edition.
So it's a living document almost.
I think so. At least in the little control that I would have over it. But yes, I think it's
Uh,
very. I know Alan likes it. Alan, whenever he's invited to talk to like high school kids and stuff like that, he takes a copy and he reads from it.
mhm.
And I know Alan is very proud of it, and I think that he was happy to make it into permanent form like this, as opposed to just you know a few pages in a special.
Right, right. Uh, you said you adapted it for stage. Has that been presented by anyone else, or have you ever presented it again?
No, that was something that it was really David Drake who did it and performed it in the nude, so it was really quite an experience. Uh, and it was the hardest thing I ever done. Not being nude is easy; it's just learning the text was hard. And Uh, it got really good reviews, even from the paper when I did it, so that was good. It has been other theatrical representations. Chris Taros and I traveled to Macon, Georgia, to see another uh, version, and there's been one in England as well that has like dancing and several performers. So it's been adapted more than once, and each version is different. I think that it's good for it to be interpreted by different artists. And I think that we did one version, but I'm really happy that it inspires other people to do other performances.
Right. Well, Jose, you and I have known each other for a long time, and we could talk for hours.
Yes.
Unfortunately, we're nearing the end of our hour, so I want to just kind of ask you to break down. Are there, right now we're faced with a world in which Marvel and DC are both putting out Pride books this month. Dynamite is sponsoring this Experience Pride um, video cast. Dark Horse is doing a queer book, Boom and Image, and everybody's doing queer initiatives. So are there things that you would say beyond your own work that you want to kind of give a shout out to?
And that's an interesting question. Um, there's so much content right now, and so much of it is so good that it's hard to keep up, not just with like gay, lesbian, LGBTQ content, but just in general. So I can't think of anything right now, honestly. I think that there's
Are you a part of either the Marvel or DC
yeah, I
colleges?
color a story by Skylar. For it's a yeah, she asked for me, and I did color one of the stories for the DC the question, and I'm working on the question. We did um, um, John Ridley is writing it. I'm doing the coloring for the other history of the DC universe, which is the story of the DC universe from the point of view of the non-white straight characters. So we did a Rene Montoya issue, and that was really terrific, and it got really good reviews. And
I
I'm
just
working on
got
the
that a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, that just
so that was good, but I wouldn't be like, well, you should read the stuff that I'm doing, like you said. Um,
But
but
people should read stuff that you're doing, Jose. That's
nah,
part of the point of
no, one of the things I've been working on for like almost 2 years is I've been working on two biographies of gay artists, an American one and a Spanish one. They're not connected, and they're different projects. So I've been working very seriously on both of those, and I have been working with writers and artists, and one is much more developed. The other one still it's in beginning stages because it's in Spain and I need to be there to really focus on that. But yeah, those things are. I think that the market is open, like you're saying, for gay stories. I think the market is really more gay friendly than it's ever been. And I think that there's a lot of levels that you can take that. And I would like to at this point in my career, I want to do something that is a little bit more serious because that's who I am. And but always keeping an eye on something that would be commercial and that people would actually enjoy.
Right, right. It's interesting that you mentioned the biographies, because I am in the development stages of and have talked to a couple editors of pitching a book about Alan Turing and myself. Alan is actually in my family tree,
Oh my goodness.
and I think it would be an interesting a tale of examining the kind of homophobia that he went through in his time versus the kind of homophobia that I've gone through in my career and my growing up. And I can't think of a better colorist than you for that. So
Thank you.
maybe one of these days we'll get to work together.
I'm always open.
Jose, thank you very much for your time here. And we want to also thank the Experience Pride and to Nick Barucci and the Dynamite team for allowing us this platform. And I believe that this is going to go on all month, that we will be experiencing interviews and creators. There's Kyle and Jenna came on. That we'll be experiencing interviews and creators from throughout the comics industry that are queer and LGBTQI, and hopefully we'll get as fascinating a conversation as this has been with you, Jose.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me. It's been a real pleasure, and I feel very honored to be able to contribute.
Kyle
Absolutely.
and Jenna,
thank you guys.
Listening in the background. So
I was catching up. I was here. I promise. I wasn't doing work. I promise. I'm sorry.
No, that was wonderful, and I really do appreciate both of you guys. And I just want to thank Andy again. Andy put us in contact with Prism Comics, who is our partner throughout all of this, going forward and through this weekend. And we're so excited to be partnered with them and expanding these conversations and continuing them on for as long as they're willing to continue to have them. So beyond this month and beyond, just pick up a copy of The Mirror of Love, wherever you can find it.
Yeah.
Wherever. This is the best wedding present ever.
I got married during the pandemic. We're having a redo reception here in September. I'll have to call you.
All right, guys. Well, that is going to do it for day 2 of Pride here on the Experience Pride Live. We will see you throughout the month, continuing this conversation. Stay tuned in a couple of minutes here for our normal programming day. Thank you to Andy. Thank you to Jose. Thank you to Krista. Thank you to Jeremy Holt. Thank you to Steve Orlando. Thank you to yesterday's guests as well. This has been a great weekend, and we will see everyone very, very soon. We love you all.
Bye.
Bye.